and welcome to Early Reflections, the podcast where young folks talk about making it in the sonic arts. I'm your host, Adam Daniel Jones, and my guest today is my good friend, Jake Rosenberg. Jake, how you doing?
Hey, Adam, what's up?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. Real quick before we jump into it, what are some pronouns I can use for you?
Oh, he, him.
He, him. Awesome. Good to know.
Definitely.
And then also one more time before we jump, or just sort of real quick before we jump in, we are recording this at a really interesting time in history. You know, we're the date is November 5th, 2020. We are 2 days after the election of this time, so it's really weird for me in a way to be launching a podcast right now. But I think it's actually kind of the perfect distraction for everything. And you know, it's just going to be a nice, good time. Sort of my view with this podcast is just to create a space for young artists to just kind of talk about our experiences, and sort of reflect on the world, as it is and as we want it to be, as it has been. So I'm excited to just have it be.
Hell yeah. I mean, I'm all about that. I think it's a great time. I mean, it's a super weird time for sure. I mean, just to take any attention away from the bigger picture right now feels weird. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, you know, doing stuff like this is also a needed thing at this moment.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited for you that you're getting into this.
Man. Awesome. All right, well, let's jump into it. So, Jake, you are a singer, a songwriter, a guitarist, a keyboardist, a producer, just a really nice guy. What else did I miss that I can describe you as?
Well, I did start playing drums in a new band, but that's like that's more of just like a fun throw. That's like my new quirk, I'd say.
That's what's so fun about drums is, as I've known you to play them in the past, like when we're just sort of jamming, and as you sort of know, it's fun because it's really the kind of thing that a lot of different people can just jump in and start bashing around and playing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was just like a casual thing. I just started playing with my new roommates. I just moved into a new place here in Brooklyn, so
awesome.
Yeah, it just kind of happened, and yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Get some energy out.
Yeah, man. Very cool. So talk to me a little bit about your like upbringing and sort of how music was a part of like your childhood. And then in a way, how through your adolescence, how it sort of drove you to pursuing music as like a career path in the way that you have.
Well, yeah, let's see. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, I did grow up extremely privileged and like upper class, and you know, I grew up a curious kid, and I think at an early age, I definitely felt sort of a need inside of me to pursue things that help define me as an individual. And it came down to just being a curious kid and wanting to explore different things and coming upon things around the house. I used to like to take things apart and try to imagine how it all worked. And I had like a piano in my house that was my grandmother's, and that just became something that I wandered over to one day. And yeah, I mean, then I just kind of got started from there. And it really evolved over time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So were you self-taught like starting out, or did you start out with like piano lessons?
I started out with lessons, and I started out basically, you know, learning. I started out with a group, I think, like with my mom. Like your parent goes with you and you're like 5 years old. They sit with a bunch of other moms with their kids, moms or dads or what have you. And yeah, that was the first thing. And then it was basically, I was doing that for a bit, and then it got to a point. I remember I would always just like wander over, and I hated to practice, but I just liked to like play around and kind of see where my hands would go. And that's something I started doing from the beginning, but that was just like my way of approaching music, which was just like, I'm just fully in curiosity mode and exploring and seeing through that kind of what I can emote and what I need to emote. And being a sensitive kid, that was just where that was like something that I found was nice. And that could separate me from what I needed to separate myself from. And it could give me like a little bit of a home inside that. And so that was like around like third or fourth grade that I think I had like a breakthrough where I realized like in the just on the white keys that like that was something I could use to help myself with what I was going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so interesting. Like I've found in my own life, you can really find yourself like through it, but you can also find what you would want to be and what like you can both find like your strengths and your weaknesses, like sort of not even in communicating with another person, like even just having it be something that's either written down or on a page or, coded in a computer in a software, that kind of thing. It's sort of this interesting dichotomy between like your strengths and your weaknesses that's sort of fully like self-reflective.
Yeah. Like for me, it's my gravitation to like wanting to pursue music came from almost like an existential need to have a stronger sense of identity. Coming from
Mm.
a place where I've been a lot of different things to in a lot of different situations, sort of blending into a lot of different social groups and being someone who's very much an omnivore of life and being taught that from my dad and just those sort of things drew me to also just be like, oh, what's something, it became that special thing for me. And it was something just that like exploratory relationship, which later turned into songwriting, which, went on from there. I started getting into bands and stuff.
Awesome. Would you mind telling the listeners sort of what the impetus for our meeting was and how we kind of crossed paths?
Sure, you want to go there now? Yeah, I think. I mean, all right, we're jumping right to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I was playing with this band, Ava and the Oak, which was a friend of mine, Maddie, and her music, and we had a rotating kind of group around that 5-piece dream pop outfit, and which started as sort of like more of a folk band and then evolved from there. But in the middle of that, we had some of our members were, I think, graduating, moving on, and we needed to find new people. Um, and actually, before that, I also had a band for a short period of time. I was trying out my own thing, and so that's when one day I was in the cafeteria, and I remember I used to just try to meet people in the cafeteria. That was a good place, and I was sitting with someone that I knew, and I had just asked the rest of the people at the table who I didn't know. I was like, "Hey, does anyone know a good drummer around?" And just so happened one of them sent me your way, and then I forget what happened after that, but I think we had a rehearsal together, and
Yeah.
then I was like, "Oh, this is a cool guy."
I seem to remember like you coming up to me in the cafeteria. Like again, like it's funny because that was sort of a very like intentional social hub for a lot of people. We went to Berkeley College of Music. I don't know if we had said that before, but yeah, sort of the Berkeley cafeteria is they do shows there. They do lots of like different whatever college type things
Yeah,
in the
it's a fun time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I pretty distinctly remember you coming up to me and being like, "Oh, blah 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 told me about you." I was really flattered because I don't think I was still a f- maybe a freshman or really early in my like third semester at Berkeley, so I had not been there very long at all. And I was just flattered that somebody had come up to me and my name had gotten to someone who like needed a drummer and who was
Right.
wanting to work with me. So you were kind of the first person who I sort of started to play music outside of like ensembles and stuff with at Berkeley.
Wow. Oh, I mean, I didn't realize that. I mean, it happened with you that, or it so happened that when we brought you in, it just seemed like, it was almost like I knew after we hung out, I was like, oh, okay, this is like a really cool guy who I'd love to be friends with. And yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
that's nice.
Yeah, that's nice that you said that. Yeah, it's sort of, yeah, I think that I like to think that we pretty instantly became friends because it was, it was a guy who I, instantly hit it off with, and I didn't necessarily have to put on like an act or anything, because, as much as people don't like to admit, that kind of stuff kind of happens at Berkeley quite a bit, where you sort of have to put on a mask a little bit and, kind of try harder to fit in with some people than others. But I feel like I just didn't really have to try too hard with you, which I super liked. And I was like, oh, I definitely want to be in this guy's band or play, wherever I can, because he was so cool to work with, like off the bat.
Well,
so.
Stop it. Oh man.
Yeah.
It warms
Totally.
my tender heart.
Well, so yeah, let's move on. So Washburn in the River, it's a very distinctive name. Can you go through sort of the etymology of it and where you got it from? Because I know it has to do with a vacation spot that you had been to and like have really fond memories of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, tying back to where I was at earlier, kind of. So once I got into middle school, I was playing piano and I started to just play music after school with some friends. And that turned into like what you'd think of as your middle school rock band, stereotypical in certain ways from the suburban background. And we just played a bunch of different rock music. We played like a lot of Rise Against, I remember. I mean, I think we started with Green Day. And then about the beginning of high school, that's when we decided to, or actually, it was at that point that the two leaders of the band, which were me and my friend Max, our interest in music completely diverged as we were sort of heading down separate paths. And so he was really into the hard rock type stuff, and as well as the really soft pop rock in his songwriting. And for me, I was getting into this music that I was exposed to by my friend Jonah, which was this indie folk, this more raw sounding, starting with like Bon Iver was a big one from the beginning. And then some lesser known, such as like Radical Face. And there was an early Bombay Bicycle Club album called Flaws. But just like those random things. But we just decided that we wanted to do this folk thing. So we started this project, just the two of us. And that was an exciting prospect. But then we got into that and we started recording and writing, and he was the guy on guitar and I was the guy on piano. And he's a talented guitarist, talented songwriter, but it's not his like favorite thing in the world. He's got like so many different interests, and I wanted to play what he was doing. Like basically he would bring these ideas to the table and I loved every one of them. I mean, because this guy was one of my biggest influencers in terms of the music that I was getting exposed to. He was the guy who was bringing me all this music and really helping me shape my taste. But yeah, so we called it Washburn in the River because we wanted something that felt like really personal in like that title. And in my family, we have my grandparents have like a history of going to Cape Cod that started after World War II and bringing my father and his siblings out to a very specific place in East Falmouth, which is this bay, sort of untouched from commercial kind of tourism, and just like this very classic New England setting, very beautiful setting. And spent many summers and weekends and springs and falls going there with my family for a couple days at a time, and just in this cabin out in the woods by a river. So that became like the inspiration. So it's like, why that, right? So it's always tricky to explain it because it's basically just like, how they say like a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
It's just an old expression, right? So in this case, it was like this place has like more than 1,000, has 1,000,000 memories, 1,000,000 feelings associated, this feeling of being in like a nature haven. Growing up in the suburb, my what developed as like this appreciation for nature and just what kind of feelings and how connected I could feel with that. Um, and through that, like connection with parts of myself, it just became like something extremely important. And I felt, okay, we're going to be making this organic, raw, natural music. Like this to me is like this bedrock that I'm going to have. I mean, it's very like idealistic, but it's like, oh, this is where all of this music and wherever this goes, it's all going to spring from this place.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not, it's just like the symbolism behind, okay, this, because to me, it's like not having a strong sense of identity internally. We can attribute our identity to these like various things. And so I was like, okay, this place, this thing, like this to us, what this will always mean, that feels like something that's not going to die down, that fire, whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that actually sort of perfectly brings me into another question that I had. So, I think we kind of nailed it on this one, but yeah, so I personally, I'm not much of a songwriter or really a composer, but I kind of feel like when I'm conceptualizing music, I find that that sort of geography is a really big influence. And like physically being in a different space or in whatever space I'm in, like working through the music in my head, it just brings out different, whether it's lyrical content, which isn't necessarily the case for me, but definitely like melodically and production wise, those are like geography is such a huge influence on the way that I like conceptualize music. I can tell that you agree, but I'd love it if you kind of just went off on that a little bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have the power to take our minds to certain places sometimes. If you've ever done like a guided meditation, it takes a lot of concentration and practice. But for me, like having this place, it's like, there is something in music where sometimes you can get a feeling of almost like returning home or returning somewhere that is a safe space or a certain type of energy for you that feels familiar. I think, that's true in the way that certain songs will like make us cry or make us upset, if they relate to anything in life or whatever that may be. Um, but yeah, I think we definitely, because everything to us has like an element of a spatial element to it.
Yeah.
Like when we think of what we're going through, space is part of that. And I mean, I can feel sort of internally being in different environments, how that affects me in certain ways, like being in a very calm, quiet, serene place, which is hard to find in New York City versus being in the middle of chaos every day, like honking horns and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Definitely. So sort of not necessarily dovetailing, but just transitioning into the next thing. So talk to me a little bit about your songwriting just workflow. And I visited you in New York about a year ago, and during then you were talking to me, and you've since talked to me a lot about how you're getting more into the production mixing side of your own stuff. So I would love to hear how songwriting and production like coincide when you're writing. Like, do production influences come to you while you're writing? Do you try to separate the processes from each other?
Yeah, so I definitely distinguish. So yeah, for me, the journey has, I mean, I was always into creative writing. Songwriting for me was something that I felt like capable of developing even when I wasn't very good at it, because it is sort of true that you can learn to do anything if you just commit to that thing that you're going to do. And then all that and it ends up as is a question of how long that'll take. So I started with the songwriting, and I was doing that for years, and I was always terrified of production. Like just thinking that it was just way over my head, and just I think I need, for me, what I needed was to get competent at one thing first before I tried to take on a whole another world. So it helped me to really sink my teeth into my instrument, sink my teeth into really developing this muscle of being able to write, being able to come up with ideas, that whole process. And then sort of learning production like from a peripheral sense, in the beginning, working with all these producers, and going from a place of I have no voice in this room, or I feel completely like I have no idea this role of a producer and how to, like, what that entails. I just don't understand it. Now I'm at a point where it's like working with a producer to me is like working with another songwriter now, where it's like I can do things, and I'm still at the beginning of my producer journey, no doubt.
Yeah.
Like, and also just keeping it in a functional sense, like what am I trying to accomplish with learning production, because it's so dense and because there's so many ways you can take it. So I think that's helped me in that sense. And I just sort of take it one piece at a time, trying out a new thing here. Like the other day, I was trying to auto tune my voice, seeing how that would work. And so I'm always pushing like one new button, one new thing, and stretching in many different ways. As you know, I mean, I write like a lot of different kinds of music too.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so it's songwriting is totally separate, and then the production is like a different headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you find yourself, like, do you physically need to be like taking a break between, oh, like I've got this song down, now I can work on the production stuff? Because that's so interesting to me, because the way that I've sort of came upon music like with that kind of thing in mind. Because when I was starting, especially when I was starting to play guitar, I was always sort of realizing that different sounds can help evoke different emotions and everything. So I think it's interesting. Like, I had never necessarily like separated those two from each other. So I think I love that that's how that's worked. There's a lot that you can learn from that, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I have too many options in front of me, that can feel very overwhelming. And I want to be as present as I can when I'm writing. So if I just have a guitar and voice memos to record what I'm doing, and I just allow myself to sit in the moment, then usually, I mean, it's become a quicker and quicker process to get to the place of where a song can come out.
Yeah.
Just by that practice of every week being like, all right, time to write a few more and just see what happens this time. And I do want to approach things in different ways. I'm producing like a hip hop record this fall for just a client.
Nice.
Now I'm starting to produce for other people, and um I'm going to try to approach that from like doing a drum machine first and layering harmony, melody, everything on top of it. Yeah, so I mean, always approaching from different angles is a great way to explore a whole new side of your artistry.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that a lot of my favorite music, it really comes upon like having varied sources of inspiration be like the most consistent part of like songwriting or whatever. I think that that's the one thing that should stay, is that you're taking stuff in and you're, letting it hit you as it does, but knowing that it's always in different ways. Like I'll come from something like just sitting down and picking a guitar up, or like sitting down and, at the drum kit and having that in mind. But, I think that, yeah, each of them like informs each other like so much more than the other.
Yeah, I mean, going off on that, like production has really helped shape my songwriting in a fundamental way. I mean, I had an experience, a very like important in my development, with some of my work I did with my producer Dan Alvarez de Toledo from the band Toledo, and he taught me so much just because he knew how to take what I was doing and shape it a bit more, just so it could be accessible, just so like he could help me bring myself out, um and so we take these songs that I would bring in, and he'd be like, all right, we're gonna change all these chords so that they fit your voice better, we're gonna completely like break down this melody, and here's what you need to know about recorded music.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because for me, I'm used to just playing by myself in my room, or, my idea of showing someone a song would be sitting down on a carpet with a nice crackling fire and some chamomile tea and just like, you know,
Yeah.
um, with a corncob pipe on like a dark, stormy night, like that kind of thing. But I don't, so basically, when you know this, like when you take something, you put it into a DAW, you put it into record it, it completely like
Right.
alters it. That's something I've loved to lean into is like, oh, if I'm going to play this live, I'm going to show you one side of this, but there's other sides to this onion. And I'm going to like, for the recorded, I might have, I've done stuff where I've had two completely different versions of a recorded song as
Yeah.
well to, because different emotions you can get in different
Yeah,
perspectives, all that.
exactly. I was gonna yeah, so that's great because I have really distinct memories of that sort of both playing your own solo music and then playing with Eva and the Oak. There were always like different versions, and sort of as we got other people involved, like as we would bring someone like our buddy Eduardo Kirschbaum in, he would totally bring a completely other like separate flavor in that we had not at all thought about, and sort of like watching that process evolve the songs. It sort of it's this really interesting thing where it's almost like parallel universes. It's like songs will branch off into different like states of being, and each of those are really interesting and cool in similar ways, different ways. It's just such a cool thing that happens with bringing other people into the songwriting process and the production process like that.
Yeah, you'd be surprised where how that works out. But yeah, we can totally, like, I believe like in the impermanence and the imperfection of like the art we create, and that's part of the brilliance of it, is nothing is set in stone. And that's just that's part of my core philosophy as a songwriter with lyrics, and there's an intention to that where it's like, oh, I'm going to continue changing as a human being, so why not like this artistic expression, in subtle ways. I'm not saying fundamentally, but as I change, this should not, like when I'm like 50 years old, I'm not going to try to sing a song that I wrote when I was 24 the way I was when I was 24,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Ava and the Oak. So tell me about you and Maddie meeting and sort of what each of you separately, because I know that Maddie would often have like a really specific vision in her head of the songs. And you would have your own like similar vision, but also like supplemental to what she was thinking. So talk to me sort of about how that songwriting would go.
um well, yeah, I mean, Maddie is wonderful. She's evolved so much as a songwriter over the years. And it's been really cool to see that. As because I met her when we were both 17, and now that's like 8 years later. Now she's making completely different music, and even before I met her, she was making different
Mhm.
music. So, but yeah, just getting into stuff with her. She brings songs to the table, and it wasn't always like me doing any sort of direction. It's really more just like, let's bring the band in. Um, I would help make the charts, and I had the music theory knowledge to help communicate things. But then, I mean, I felt for the most part, she always knows what she wants, first off. Or she's
Yeah.
good about like saying in a band setting, like, let's do it this way. But it was always a thing where anyone could bring a suggestion to the table, which was cool. Um, so yeah, I'd say I was more of like a utility to the band, like in a way of, oh, I'll help us like communicate the music theory or whatever we're doing here. And I'd say over time, like I explored more with different sounds, how those help the sound, using synths more than just like piano or Rhodes or something. Um, but yeah, I would say nothing more than that, really. Yeah, and I would also find a lot of the musicians, which was always
Yeah, you were sort of like the A&R man of the band. You'd be writing the charts, and you'd be putting out different feelers for bringing folks in, and
booking some house
yeah,
shows.
exactly. Yeah,
You
some
know,
some house shows. Yeah, that's a whole. It's so interesting because it feels still pretty recent for me, but so talk to me about that a little bit, because that was something that I think that we both had like an interesting amount of overlap with. So I'm from originally from Portland, Oregon, and there is, you know, a pretty significant house show scene back there, and now I'm living just outside of Seattle, and there's, you know, a pretty big scene here. I mean, obviously not right now during the pandemic, but talk to me a little bit about how the scenes in like Boston and Allston compared to the scene in Brooklyn and in other boroughs in New York.
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely can't speak for the whole scene in either place, just because the music that I do or the music I'm attracted to is such a niche part of that. But
Right.
I can say that both scenes, I mean, pre-COVID were super vibrant, and they still are. I mean, Boston, starting there, has had a tradition of having great like underground bands come out of that scene, whether it be, you know, all the different shades of rock music, which I'm no expert on, but um, you know, punk music. We see a lot of great like female led punk bands, or just like so much like people that are non-binary, or any sort of LGBTQ like folk. There's a really great scene for that kind of queer music, um, or at least there was for a time. And I know that it hasn't always been that. And I know there's been also plenty of times when the DIY scene has been very like awful.
Yeah,
There's certain pockets of it.
right.
You know what I mean? Like it's a mixed bag. I don't want to. Speaking too generally.
No, that's not bad at all.
Well, yeah, you remember like what's that place like Out of the Blue
Oh,
Gallery?
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
God, just like some awful booking agents, whatever you call it. You know, those pay to play. There's some sketchy stuff in Cambridge, but in
Yeah.
Alston, there was a great house show scene. Every single weekend, there would be shows up and down the block, all different types of shows. And most of them were just like amazing. Like almost all of them, super welcoming. And the great thing was that like every year they would flip and new people would come in for the people moving out, and new, you know, like identities for those houses would spring up,
Yeah.
and new ones would spring up and old ones would go down, and so this just kept rotating, and bringing in all sorts of different energies, and from all of the colleges gathered in that area. It was a really cool thing. You could hop a fence to go from one show to the other, and there'd be two completely different styles of music, completely different groups, crowds, and different like energies even. And it was, you know, it's a well kept secret, I would say. Um,
Yeah, definitely. That was the interesting thing with, but like between, I mean, I was in Portland going to shows when I was still fairly young. You know, I was around high school age, so I sort of saw that they were all mostly the same types of people, like either being at all the same ones or running the same like houses for a while. And I think that was such, I mean, and it's kind of the nature of Alston, the Alston area itself, is because it was always shifting and rotating. There's, you know, it's a college town, and it's where, you know, basically I would argue most off-campus college students in the Boston area live in and around Alston and those surrounding areas. So there was always this great yeah, rotating cast of bands that would play, and houses to go to shows at. So I think that was my experience, because, you know, I was a little bit older. As I came to Boston, that was what would differentiated it from the Portland and the Seattle scene.
yeah, and it was all just college kids, all just looking to have a good time. I mean, it was just nice because there was always something going on.
Yeah.
And so I played some around in some of those. I played my fair share of house shows.
Hmm.
But because I lived in that area, I could always find music, so it was a great way to find bands, um, as well as just to see people play. But then upon moving to Brooklyn, a very different scene, and also just like a huge scene. And I haven't been to as many house shows out here, but the ones I have been to have been great. And what is especially fun out here is people putting on shows in their backyard, in like Bed-Stuy, for instance, and then Like there's
Yeah.
one set of shows that I go to every month where a guy that I met in an Uber invited me to come out to a party that he was having. He was a producer, and I ended up going. This was around the time that I had just moved to the city, um, and it was just like music all day from starting around noon to like 10 o'clock. And it was like 6 different styles. It was like, oh, first there's a folk guy. Now we're going to have a DJ. Now we're going to have hip hop. Now we're going to have electronic. And it was all different artists. And now we're moving into bands. And so, but with a very social atmosphere where there's hot dogs out and it's like sunny and, you know,
Yeah.
key ingredients were like, okay, this is a nice time, you know. And
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so much character in this city, and there's just every single like little hole that you find walking down the street seems to have its own just like embedded history of. It's great. It's like every day is a museum of sorts.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, like about a year ago now, I came down to New York for a different reason. I was going to see a live taping of my favorite podcast, which is My Brother and Me. But I remember I really wanted to meet up with you, and I think we went and maybe got margaritas somewhere. And then you brought me to this really cool backyard house show. It was very cool because it was fairly cold. It was a fall evening in New York, but it was really great because it was started as a few different bands playing. I know it was your guitar who was playing with you at the time. It was Glenn Echo.
Right.
Yeah. And that was really cool because he played an awesome set. But then it was a really cool open mic. And I remember somebody doing tap dancing too.
Yes. Oh no. Yeah. And meditation.
That's right. It was just so cool. It was like, it was in this fairly small backyard, like in Bed. Was it in Bed-Stuy? It might have been in Park.
It was actually in Park Slope.
Park Slope.
It was like on the edge of Park Slope.
Yeah, God, it was so cool. It was just the most like diverse night of like culture I had seen in a really long time. You know,
you got a nice dose of culture. Yeah. I mean, and the cool thing is like out here, it's not all music. Like some of the coolest shows I've been able to go to, like I went to a 420 show in West Bushwick that was half comedians and half singer-songwriters. And then we actually had a comedian who was like a singer and had like music comedy. And so it was just plus like a comedian hosting that. And just like shows where you have experimental things, like going to a show recently, there was just a very small thing out on a rooftop and it was really cold. And there was a saxophone player, a friend of mine, Peyton, who was playing with a dancer. It was like a snake and like a snake tamer. Like they were doing this whole dance back and forth, completely improvised. And so just an example, you never really know what you're going to find. Like there's always something new, something surprising. And there's no bullshit. There's just like people are just, it's just nice. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. So we're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna break for a segment I'm going to be calling Meditation Minute. So yeah, enjoy. Howdy, and welcome to Meditation Minute. So this segment is basically just going to be in lieu of an ad break because we're still pretty early on, obviously, as this is our first episode of the podcast. But this is essentially just going to try to calm your nerves. You know, we're living in a kind of stressful time. So during the quarantine, I've been collecting a library of field recordings, and I figured this would just be a good place to play them. So I will be including some of those. So the one I have recorded for you today is one that I took at a really small beach in the north end of Bainbridge Island, which is the neighborhood that I live in. And I recorded it with a pair of Octava MK012 microphones. They're set in an ORTF pattern. You can hear a couple seals, I think, in it. You can hear maybe a plane by, but yeah, just take a listen and let it wash over you and enjoy. All right, and we're back. Jake, good to have you with me still. So we're gonna talk about two songs. We're gonna talk about one from your 2019 album, Fear of Fallow Season's Greetings, and we're gonna talk about one of your new singles. So the first one I want to talk about is a song that I have a bit of a connection to, and it's a song called Beauty is a Burden.
There are certain songs that I write where I can't play them for like months and months until after. Basically, I've written the song, but I can't play them. And then by practicing the song more and more until I can, that's how I like improve like the guitar in certain ways.
Right.
And that was a song which I wrote my freshman year at school. And that song's important to me I mean, it's sort of like when you're at something for a while, it felt like something more solid than something I've done before. And I wrote it back. I was in North Carolina actually when I first started writing it. And I was hanging out with Maddie down there, and I remember she had told me the story about her guitar that she had gotten in the basement from like an old, like her guitar teacher that was also like her weed dealer at the time or something. And it was like had been sitting in a basement in the middle of North Carolina for like 10 years or something. And it just had this like really woodsy, earthy smell to it. And I really like fell in love with that guitar. I was like, because before that I had just had all these cruddy guitars, and I hadn't really like gotten really into guitars yet. And I remember this guy from Berkeley, Quinn Bashan, who's this insane Canadian bluegrass guitarist, jazz guitarist, who I'm happy to be friends with. He had given me a little guitar lesson, and he had just showed me some new voicings in a whole new like area on the guitar, you know, because I had been sticking with my same things. And as soon as I learned it was basically these inversions, I started putting that together. And I had actually tried to do it for the album before, because that song came out around the time where I was finishing my previous album, which is no longer anywhere because it's terrible. But basically I tried to do like an acoustic version. I like this very just like guitar vocal thing. And then I realized it's like, oh, we kind of rushed that, you know? And then I did a video with the song, for this thing called the Crab Sessions on YouTube, which really represented the song fairly well, like very well for just like the bare bones.
I remember because I got the privilege to play drums on that song. And it was such an interesting recording process, partly because I came from a drumming education where I hadn't necessarily been reading charts that much. You were really one of the first people like in a band to be like, oh, here's a chart, read it through. We've got like it was nice because you had like specific things you wanted done. And I was not used to that, but that really informed my playing like for the future in a really good way. And I remember in the final version of the song, the intro starts off with brushes, because I remember we did two separate takes. We did a take just with brushes, and we did a take just with sticks. And I remember hearing that you guys had crossfaded the brush version with the drumstick version throughout the song. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I would have never like thought to do that at like that point when I was like thinking about producing music and, playing drums. So I thought that was something that was really, really cool.
Well, yeah, that song was so special to me that it became a very ambitious track. I ended up putting like a whole string quartet, a giant guitar solo. And then after that was all done, I was kind of like, wow, I kind of overdid this. And I think that's fine. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like I'd worked on it over and over again with all of these different ways of the song taking shape with the band and everything else, that it was like when I was finally like ready to put my stamp on it, it just ended up being like so much more. But underneath all that, like I still think it's a great song,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. So you actually split lead vocal duties on that song with our friend Maddie. So was that something that you knew you had wanted to do with her? And was that like an intentional part of the lyrics that you had written?
Yeah, I mean, before that, we've been working together for a couple years, and I thought our voices always sound really great together. And she's also just gifted at doing harmonies. That's something she
Mhm.
did so much with like another band she was in, where she was the backup singer and she just sang all these crazy jazz harmonies. But yeah, she just has like a really nice compliment. I have a lower voice. She has a much higher, light, feathery voice, and just kind of glides in the music. And I needed that kind of feminine sound to really help complement what I was trying to do with the music, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about the lyrics of the song. So did the what like sort of space did those come from?
The space that all my songs kind of come from, which is just my subconscious.
Mm.
And I think at that time I was sort of trying to figure out, I had a pattern of going after romantic partners that were damaged and wanting to be that savior, the fixer.
Mm.
And so I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's just something for
Mm.
me that, like, I was sort of learning that, I'd actually want a healthy relationship. I should not be going after a relationship that's going to be burdensome. And then this idea of burden when it comes to relationship became something that I was stewing on for a while. And then also I was thinking about, because I had pursued certain women in the past where things hadn't worked out, but maybe I had a crush on this person and I just, from the surface, like I didn't know anything about them and I was interested in them. And it brought me to this idea of image, and how, like, having like really attractive features in some ways that can be burdensome, because for
Mm.
those people, it's like everyone else sort of envies the people that have those qualities in certain ways. I mean, we have such an image driven society.
Yeah.
And so like they're conditioned in that way. And it's like we don't often think about, like, for those people, like the burdens that they have to deal with because of that image work. And, all of these movies that we watch about, attractive people getting together, like rom-coms and all of these things. And there is like an actual thing underneath the burden that certain people have because they are chosen, and targeted, I would even say, like,
Mm.
by others. And that attention, whether it's desired or not, there is sort of like a dark side to like beauty. So those different pieces, that relationship piece and this idea of the burden of being on the other side, um, of like a relationship, when someone is pursuing and or going after trying to make the power moves, or they're expected to make power moves or whatever, facilitate. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's real. That's a yeah. And it's funny because I'm sort of one of those people where I don't necessarily look at lyrics like the first few listen through, especially if I'm playing the music myself. So hearing you talk about that, like it's funny. It's a song that I still have such like fond memories of playing, but it comes from, I wouldn't say a dark place, but it comes from a pretty like emotionally complex, like, it has some weight to it place. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, I used to write a lot about unrequited love, and what I was really writing about is all of these projections of a relationship without actually exploring like what this would be, without putting this sort of judgment, taking my mind out of it and just being there. Um, and so I think for a long time, like, there was a lot I could draw from in those feelings of what could be and the what if. Like, just walking down the street, depending on who you walk by, you could start up a conversation with anyone. You never really know, where all these opportunities, but you can also imagine, what one thing could lead to another.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna move on to the next one. So the other song I want to talk about is "Don't Thank Me," a very new song that you've had commercially released. So talk to me about that. Like off the top, I can tell that it's more I wouldn't say that it's more electric, but I can tell you're used, the Washburn in the River stuff that I played on, a lot of it was acoustically driven with your sort of singer-songwriter guitar. But I feel like it's an interesting distinction between the old songs and the new songs. Were you intentionally trying to sort of bridge a gap or like sort of emphasize a progression in your songwriting?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much on the forthcoming record, but I will
Sure.
say, yeah, there is intention to be a bit more accessible.
Hmm.
I wanted to make music that was in a niche that would connect deeply with a small number of people, and I think I wanted to explore what would happen if I tried to make music that was still me, but was trying to reach a wide number of people and didn't have as many layers as some of my other stuff in terms of the writing. Was just a bit more like clear and to the point about the emotional content, um, and just the communication offered.
Yeah.
Yeah, with some of these newer ones, I tried to bring more energy into my music. But let's try to push this to rock. So that song specifically, that was one of the first songs I wrote off this new batch of songs, and we went out to the cabin in the woods that Washburn in the River gets its name from. Me and
Hmm.
my producer to make the album about a year ago, back in September of 2019, and I had just planned to record and work on all the stuff that I had written to that point. But when I got there, I was sort of surprised a little bit because my producer was like, "All right, I'm gonna get to work now. Go off and write some music." And so he was kind of like, "All right, go write a song. Just go." And so I kind of left him to his business and went off to write a song, which I don't do that. I don't write a song on command. So this kind of showed me that, without forcing anything, this song popped out relatively quickly. And I at that point I was listening to some Pine Grove, Pine Grove.
Yeah.
So I was just getting exposed to them a little bit. And I knew that was one of the artists that I was like, all right, if we can take this a little towards that direction, then maybe that's going to serve this music. It will serve. And that was like some inspiration behind the beginnings of that. And then we immediately took that into the studio and started producing it. And that was really cool because hadn't done it so instantly like that.
Yeah.
And that's when the song really took shape.
Yeah, I love that. That I feel like is such an interesting, like, it gives you, I feel like, I don't want to say pressure necessarily, but it puts like another layer of like stimuli on you, knowing that you're going to go pretty soon into the production stage. I'm sure that brings different ideas out in different ways than, like you prefer to do, like sort of sit and really flesh it out as a song and then go into the production process afterwards. So I'm sure that it brought different ideas out than it would have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was really fun to be able to start from nothing and very quickly working with Dan. He works very, very quick. And so
Mm.
we're off and running and got the song from nothing to there in like 3 hours or something, which is
Wow.
getting like, 85% or 80% of the way or something. It was so
Yeah.
fast that it felt like, wow, this is exciting.
Yeah. So sort of moving on from song analysis, I'd love to sort of talk about some of your hurdles that you've had to jump over, sort of your struggles being a young person in the music industry. I feel like one that is pretty big. This is we'll talk about the pandemic a little bit in a bit, but something that I imagined is a big thing to get like acquainted with is having like that big of a move that you have done. So you had been familiar with New York, and you clearly had your like sights set on it, but coming from Boston and coming from you'd lived in Newton, you had lived in Alston. Coming from there, what was it like sort of getting acquainted to New York and, adjusting to the lifestyle
Well, I don't
switch?
know. I don't know if you remember, but remember how I was going to move to LA?
Right. I totally forgotten about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, my plans changed like at the last minute. It was kind of crazy. I mean, I was in my last semester and I was going to be moving in a month. And I was studying abroad for that, which I was really lucky to
Yeah.
do. But I had this plan like put aside for like over a year, and I had everything lined up for this internship that I needed to do to get the degree. And then the last minute, that completely fell through. So I had to start over, and it was very stressful. And I
Right.
basically had a mini panic attack. And then I just realized, like, wait, what am I thinking? Like, I don't want to go to LA. Like, LA sucks. Like, let's go to Brooklyn. Because it made so much more sense. Like, all my roommates from college were there, and my people were there. Like, my producer, my team, because I had these dreams of like jumping into the pop songwriting, and I was like, you know what? Let's wait on that, and let's first like give my own music a fair shot. You know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, and then I just kind of found a spot like last minute, and haven't looked back. Really, I mean,
Yeah, that's
till
awesome.
the pandemic, and then yeah. So
Right. Yeah, so sort of as a perfect pivot, what does being an artist like day to day look like during the pandemic for you?
Um, well, I mean, I'm doing a lot of different things remotely, which has been really nice. I mean, basically, I don't want to say I called it, but back at the beginning of the pandemic, I had the I'm a gut instinct kind of guy, and I had this instinct, or no, not an instinct, but I just had a feeling that,
Yeah.
this was going to be big. This was not going to be a few weeks. This was not going to be a month. And I was sort of like in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm moving on to remote. I was doing music therapy work in Brooklyn at a bunch of different schools, and, traveling all over the city each week to do that, and also teaching piano and these various things. And I was like, okay, this is all going to change really fast, and we're going to have to adapt to that. But I'm going to need to like totally pivot for the next 6, 7, 8 longer. And, this is going to be about self work. This is going to be about just growth and just taking care of myself and exploring myself. I'm just shifting inward here because I'm about to lose all of this outside stimulus. I'm about to hunker down like everyone else. But I was trying to approach it from like, okay, what can I do to turn this negative into something positive? And maybe if I just, oh, this is an opportunity to work on X, Y, and Z. Because with music, there's always stuff to work on. So that's part of what I love, is no shortage of that. So on most days, I'm
Yeah.
pretty content just jumping from guitar to piano to, okay, I'm going to write a song. All right, let's do some production. All right, let's do some music therapy, or um, all right, let's teach, and so on and so forth. So there's always something, and that's part of what I love about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of, again, I don't like to say that there are like goods and bads about a global pandemic where there's like hundreds of thousands of people dying or like, but it really has like there's like aspects of it that like this podcast, I would not have thought to do this podcast if there wasn't a global pandemic happening. And there's other stuff like I've gotten into field recording lately, which is what all the listeners heard during the meditation minute. So it's sort of, it's in these times of horrible, terrible things happening, there's, little silver linings, and it's about finding those little things and narrowing in on them and, expanding them into good, like productive stuff that you can be doing.
Absolutely. Especially when you feel like inadequate in something, and you're like, oh, now I have like 4 more hours every day to put into that. And I mean,
Yep.
that's obviously only if you have privilege, because like as we've seen with this pandemic, it's really like the people that can afford to are the ones that are hunkered away, and then everyone else
Yeah.
are still operating, but just in a state of just, carrying that immense weight that the people with privilege don't have to feel at all. And it's just, there's
Absolutely.
something really, it's why I'm like, I try to live every day very purposefully, because I'm like, I have to like not take advantage of, I mean, I need to just do what I can to, make this stuff matter, and make what I'm doing matter, and actually have impact, and find a way to do that on as many levels as possible. Like we have work to do from that position.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jake, we are kind of rounding about to the end of the podcast. So real quick before we sort of sign off, so in a either pre or post pandemic world, or maybe as some stuff to look forward to, what would your advice for somebody who's wanting to pursue songwriting, being a musician, producing, what would your advice for them be?
My advice would be to allow yourself to not have judgment around creating and just see how that feels.
Mm.
I think like when we get involved with these things, we're so used to judging our output. Oh, how did I do today at work? Was this a good day? Was this a bad day? How did I do in no matter what we do? How did I do cooking that meal tonight? And I think something that could be of service to a lot of people is allowing themselves to go inward with using music as a tool and seeing what happens when you come at it from curiosity and exploring, because curiosity is the opposite of judgment. So when we approach things from curiosity, we are open to all these new possibilities. And I just think you can develop a relationship. Anyone can do it. And you can develop a relationship with these tools where you can really go deeper into yourself and you can get like a lot of richness from that. So yeah, just don't ever close yourself off to opportunities and allow
Yeah.
yourself to just see what happens.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful way to close it out. So I want to thank Jake Rosenberg so much for being a guest on the inaugural episode of this podcast. So Jake, where can our audience find you? Do you want to give us some quick social media plugs?
Sure. You can follow me on Spotify, Washburn in the River. I have last year's album you mentioned, which is out. I'd love for you to check that out. And I just put out 2 songs a month and a half ago for my new record, 2 singles. And then I'm also on Instagram, Washburn and the River, no spaces, all lowercase, and all the other social media plugs, whatever is your preferred plug. But yeah, I'm out there.
Beautiful. All right. This has been Early Reflections. I'm Adam Daniel Jones. Find us on Facebook at Early Reflections with Adam Daniel Jones. I'm on Instagram at Adam Daniel Jones, all lowercase. And remember, early reflections have an important role in determining the sound and character of a space. See you soon.